I used to love the way candlelight made everything feel softer, like even the jagged edges of disappointment could be blurred into something manageable. That night, the night everything cracked, I sat at the center of a long mahogany table, in a restaurant Adrian had chosen. He always chose. The waiter refilled our glasses with something sparkling and dry. Laughter swelled from the far end of the table, where his business partner told a joke I didn't hear. I was busy smoothing the navy silk of my dress. The one Adrian once said brought out my eyes. 6 years ago, I'd worn it on our honeymoon. 6 years ago, he couldn't stop touching my hand under the table. Now his hand was gripping a wine glass, raised above the clinking and chatter. "I'd like to make a toast," Adrian announced, flashing his practiced grin. Forks paused. A hush settled over the room like snowfall. "To my beautiful wife," he began, and I smiled reflexively. 6 years married. Feels like yesterday and also a lifetime. Polite chuckles. I nodded, touched his arm. He continued. "She used to be a real firecracker. Always designing something, chasing dreams. Now, she's a professional blanket burrito, a connoisseur of Sauvignon Blanc and rewatching Grey's Anatomy. Our very own queen of online shopping." The table erupted in laughter, hesitant, searching. I laughed too. A dry, practiced sound. My ears burned. I sipped my wine to keep from speaking. My mouth had gone cotton dry. And because I believe in gifts with meaning, Adrian reached under the table and pulled out a box. My heart fluttered in a hopeful, pathetic way. Jewelry? A love letter? He opened it for me. Inside was a white T-shirt, on it a cartoon version of me, wide eyes, glass of wine in hand, messy bun, fuzzy slippers. The caption, "Trophy wife on expiry." Someone across the table snorted. "That's savage," someone else whispered. I stared at it. Not the shirt itself, but what it represented. A punchline. I forced a smile. My jaw ached with the effort. "Wow," I said, because anything else would shatter the moment completely. Adrian leaned over, kissed my cheek. "Come on, babe. It's just a joke." I nodded. I always nodded. The rest of the dinner passed like a fever dream. I remember the taste of the crème brûlée, too sweet and burning the back of my throat. I remember smiling until my face hurt, answering questions I didn't register. My body was present. My spirit had fled. When we got home, I didn't speak. I walked upstairs, still in my heels, my hair still curled, makeup still perfect, like a mannequin placed in the wrong scene. Adrian went into his office, probably to scroll through work emails or Instagram stories he shouldn't be watching. He didn't notice I hadn't changed. He didn't notice when I lay on top of the bedspread, the zipper of my dress still cinched at my spine, heels still digging into the mattress. I stared at the ceiling fan, counted the revolutions like I used to count dreams. At some point, I rose. My legs wobbled like they were made of wax. I opened the top drawer of my vanity, where I kept sentimental things too fragile to leave out. There it was. Our first anniversary card. His handwriting then was rounded, deliberate. No shortcuts. "You make me better. I don't deserve you, but I'll spend forever trying to." I touched the card like it might disintegrate. Then I looked at the T-shirt, which he'd casually tossed onto the chair by the door. It lay there, bright and mocking. I placed the card next to the shirt. Love beside ridicule. Memory beside mockery. A crime scene, but the murder weapon was words. I sat there, cross-legged on the carpet, staring at them both. The old Adrian. The new Adrian. Maybe he hadn't changed. Maybe I'd just stopped pretending not to see. My fingers traced the ring on my hand. The diamond had always felt too large, too loud for me. I used to joke it looked like it belonged to someone else's life. Now, I realized, I'd been right. The woman who wore this ring, who laughed politely at public. Humiliations, who smiled through tiny deaths every day. She wasn't me. Not really. She was who he wanted me to be. A caricature, a joke in a T-shirt, and I'd played along, until now. Before Adrian, my life was messy in the most beautiful way. I worked out of a co-op loft space downtown, an old, converted textile mill with exposed brick, creaky floors, and sunlit windows smudged with fingerprints and possibility. My hands were always stained with ink or gouache, my laptop scattered with half-finished client decks and experimental typography. I wasn't rich, I wasn't even steady, but I was alive. That's where I met him. Adrian. He'd walked into the studio during a building-wide art crawl, all pressed collar and quiet confidence. I was hanging a set of framed gig posters, my hands shaking from nerves and too much coffee, when he stopped, admired them, and asked if I did commissions. "I know nothing about art," he said, flashing a smile that seemed to warm the cold, cement underfoot. "But I know what I like." He offered to take me to dinner, to talk design. That first night, he listened, really listened, to my dreams, my ridiculous plans to start a boutique branding agency for independent creatives. He said my ambition was sexy. He ordered for me, paid without looking at the check, called me remarkable. He made chaos feel temporary. He made structure sound like safety. I started spending more nights at his place, a perfectly curated house, in a gated suburb where even the mailboxes matched. There were candles that always smelled like sandalwood and bergamot. No clutter, no deadlines looming over dishes in the sink. When my lease was up, he said, "Why waste money on rent?" When a client check bounced, he said, "You shouldn't have to deal with that." When I hesitated about giving up my studio space, he kissed my temple and whispered, "Just take a break. You deserve it." So I did. 1 month bled into 6. Then into a year, I told people I was between projects. He started calling me his calm. Told me how lucky he was to come home to a woman who wasn't stressed or buried in deadlines. He brought me a white cashmere robe one morning, said, "This is the version of you I love best. Soft, cozy, peaceful." So I stopped working late. I stopped making messes with my paints. I folded myself neatly into the version of me that made him proud. And in the process, I became small. But I didn't see it like that. Not then. I thought I was evolving, choosing love, choosing stability. When my best friend, Mira, pulled me aside one night after dinner and said, "You're quieter around him." Not in a good way, I laughed. "He just brings out a more peaceful version of me," I said. She raised an eyebrow. Peace or permission? I ignored her. Like I ignored my mother when she said, during a strained Sunday lunch, "You're not you anymore around him. It's like you're waiting for someone to tell you what to do." Adrian never raised his voice, never laid a hand on me, but he gently steered everything. He planned our vacations, resorts with golf courses and spa packages, never the street art alley tours I used to dream of. He curated our social circle, people from his world, people who asked what firm I was with and blinked when I said I used to freelance. He handled the finances, told me I didn't need to worry about the boring stuff. He loved when I baked, when I decorated for fall in September, when I wore neutrals, so I adapted. I swapped my quirky graphic tees for camel-colored knits. I stopped dyeing my hair copper red every spring. I replaced the scent I loved, an earthy, spicy blend that made me feel like a forest fire, with the one he picked out, pure grace. He told me I smelled like a wife, and I smiled. Because wasn't that the goal? Looking back now, I see how skillfully he erased me. Not with force, but with flattery. Not with cages, but with compliments. He made me feel safe in exchange for silence. It's terrifying how easy it is to disappear when someone keeps calling your disappearance love. But the scariest part is, back then, I called it love too. The morning after the dinner, I woke with my makeup still on. My navy blue silk dress clung to my skin like wet paper, wrinkled and exhausted. I hadn't even pulled back the covers, just collapsed onto the bed, fully dressed, while Adrian snored. Softly beside me, still reeking of red wine and smugness. It was a Tuesday, but it felt like a year had passed. I wandered through the house in bare feet. The silence pressed down on me like humidity. Everything was too clean, too curated, like a museum exhibit of a life I didn't remember assembling. The hallway photos were all of us posed at events he cared about: charity galas, open house launches, ribbon cuttings, my studio days, my first solo show. Nowhere. The living room smelled faintly of lavender and eucalyptus, the scent of candles he ordered in bulk from some minimalist brand he liked. I paused by the fireplace mantel. Beige vases, cream pillows, a coffee table book about architecture I'd never once opened. This wasn't my house. It was his gallery. I went upstairs and opened the attic hatch, climbed the ladder in silence. The air was dry and stale. There they were, my art supplies, my whole creative life, sealed in dusty bins like archived evidence. Dried brushes, empty sketchbooks, tubes of paint that had probably congealed into silence. I sat there for a long time, cross-legged like a child in timeout, running my fingers over the spine of a notebook I hadn't opened in years. When I finally came down, I found Adrian in the kitchen, humming as he made coffee. He wore his robe, the one with the stitched monogram. He turned and gave me that same polished grin he wore at parties. "Morning," he said, voice bright. "You were out cold last night." I stared at him, the fog in my chest slowly thickening. "Do you think what you said last night was funny?" He blinked. "It was a joke, babe." "Was it?" He rolled his eyes and poured cream into his mug. "God, don't tell me you're still upset." Everyone laughed. I clenched my jaw. They didn't laugh, they cringed. "You're being sensitive." I felt something tilt inside me, like a picture frame knocked just off center. "I'm allowed to be sensitive," I said softly. He shrugged. "You're blowing this out of proportion." It was a t-shirt, and that was that. He kissed my forehead, told me to lighten up, and left for work. I stood alone in the kitchen, hands trembling around a mug I hadn't even filled. Later, when I changed the laundry, I found the receipt, folded neatly in the pocket of his blazer, a diamond bracelet, boutique jeweler, 3 weeks ago. My heart stalled. He hadn't given me a bracelet. There was no birthday, no anniversary. And suddenly, the world came into unbearable focus. I didn't ask. Not then. I waited. That night, while he was in the shower, I crept into the bedroom and picked up his phone. He always used the same passcode. Our old anniversary date, 4 digits, and the world broke open. Chloe. There were photos of her, blonde, younger, wide-eyed. There were messages, flirty, intimate, casual, weekend plans. A hotel booking under his name. There was one where he sent her a selfie of me asleep on the couch, captioned, "Trophy wife in hibernation mode." I dropped the phone, stumbled to the bathroom, threw up into the sink. The lavender soap stung. My nose. I rinsed my mouth, numb. I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of the tub, cold tile pressing into the back of my legs, staring at my feet like they belonged to someone else. Then I walked to the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring. Back hair that used to be wild now pulled into a passive bun. Face pale, tired. A faint smudge of mascara under one eye. I searched her eyes, desperately trying to find the girl I used to be. The woman who once stayed up until 3 a.m. painting with a glass of whiskey and jazz playing low. She was gone. That night. I took a pillow from our bed, a blanket from the linen closet, and quietly moved into the guest room. Not out of anger, out of survival. The guest room smelled like cedar and stale air. The mattress was too firm. There were no photos, no memories, just white walls and silence, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. It wasn't revenge. Not yet, but it was rebellion. The first crack in the glass, the first step back to myself. I packed like a ghost. No slamming drawers, no sobs, just methodical movements, the kind that come after too many sleepless nights and one final, irreversible truth. Adrian was on another business trip. I knew better now. The word tasted like bleach on my tongue. Folded what mattered. Not much. A worn gray hoodie with paint stains on the cuffs, the one I used to wear when I worked late into the night, music blaring, fingers smeared with color. A sketchbook still mostly empty, a toothbrush, a pair of jeans that still fit like they were mine, and one photograph. Me at 23, standing barefoot in a thunderstorm, laughing at the sky soaked to the bone. A friend had snapped it on. Some old film camera. I used to love that photo. Used to see fire in that girl's eyes. I didn't know if she'd survived, but I needed her with me, just in case. The drive took 5 hours. I watched the city dissolve in the rearview mirror, skyscrapers fading into green hills, and then into blue horizon. I hadn't been to the cottage in years. It was my aunt's, left to me quietly in her will, a little place she used to write, and I'd kept paying the property taxes, promising I'd fix it up someday. That someday had arrived like a tide I hadn't noticed rising. The cottage sat on a hill just shy of the water, shingled and crooked, its white paint faded to a soft gray. The door creaked the way I remembered. The windows were clouded with salt and memory. Inside, it smelled of ocean and old wood. I dropped the suitcase on the floor, kicked off my shoes, and exhaled so deeply it hurt. There were no scented candles. Here. No sleek beige vases. No sound but the wind through the cracked kitchen window. I cried that night. Not for him. For the girl I used to be. For every version of me that I'd sacrificed at the altar of his comfort. For every canvas I never touched, every apology I made for being too much. I cried until I felt wrung out and raw, like sea glass stripped of sharp edges. And then, finally, I slept. The days blurred. I lived by the rhythm of the waves. I walked the beach in the early mornings, hoodie sleeves pulled over my hands, salt air clinging to my hair. Some days I picked up shells. Others I just listened to the water breathing in and out, steady and indifferent. I found my old pencils, tried drawing again. My hand was shaky, my lines timid. But it came back in whispers, a curve, a shadow, a streak of stubborn color. The sketchbook began to fill. One morning, I wandered into the small town center and ducked into the only bookstore I saw. It smelled of ink and coffee and rain. A woman sat behind the counter, reading with her legs tucked beneath her. She had silver hair pulled into a messy bun and wore round glasses that slid down her nose. "You're not from around here," she said without looking up. "I used to be," she smiled. "Used to be is good enough. I'm May." Ella, her eyes softened. "You have paint on your sleeve." I looked down. A smear of blue I hadn't noticed. She closed her book. "You paint?" "Used to," I said again. May leaned back, considering. "The old studio behind the shop's just sitting empty. The last girl who used it moved away. You want it?" I blinked. "To rent?" She waved a hand. "Trade. You do the window signs. My cursive is a crime scene." I laughed. Really laughed for the first time in what felt like years. And just like that, I had a place to paint. Healing didn't arrive like a sunrise. It came in waves. Some days I felt like I could float. Others I barely got out of bed. I didn't try to rush it. I let the ocean teach me how to exist again. Let the paint bleed where it wanted. Let silence stay silent. I started keeping a journal. Not just words, fragments really. Drawings, collages, pieces of poetry I used to love. One page just read, "I am not ruined, just returning." I didn't know what I was returning to, but it felt sacred. Some nights I sat on the porch with tea, listening to the wind thrum through the tall grasses. I'd watch the stars, trying to remember who I was before I started, dimming myself to make Adrian shine brighter. I remembered my mother's voice. "You're not you anymore around him." God. She'd been right. I touched my wedding ring one night, spun it slowly on the table. It didn't feel like a promise anymore. Just a shackle forged from obligation and denial. I slid it off and placed it in the center of my sketchbook. Not as an ending, as a mark. A memory of the moment I began again. There was a hush to healing that no one talks about. Not the cinematic, triumphant roar you expect from survival stories, but a quiet gathering of self, like stitching your skin together thread by thread. I didn't mark the exact day things shifted. But one morning, I caught my reflection in the mirror, and I didn't look away. My hair was shorter now, cut with dull scissors over the bathroom sink on a night when I couldn't sleep. The ends curled with a mind of their own. My face looked different, sharper somehow, or maybe just more honest. I didn't wear makeup most days, just a little balm in the sun. My clothes weren't beige anymore. They were mine. Soft denim, loose cotton, bare feet, and ink-stained cuffs. I started choosing scarlet, deep blue, ochre. Colors I used to avoid because Adrian once said they clashed with his taste. My sketchbook turned bolder, too. My lines had teeth now, jagged, unapologetic. Some pages looked like explosions. Others were so raw I couldn't look at them for days. I painted because I had to. Because silence wasn't enough. May saw it first. She wandered into the studio one afternoon, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She glanced at the canvas propped by the window, thick with reds and rust and shadow. "This," she said softly, "is..." "Not hiding," I looked up. "It's just a study." "No, honey, this is a scream." She nudged the mug into my hand and sat down. "You ever think of showing these?" I laughed. "To who?" "There's a regional show next month in the city. Juried, but local talent. You could submit." My instinct was to say no, shrink back, deflect. But instead, I just said, maybe. It took me a week to fill out the submission form. Another week to choose which pieces to send. The deadline passed, and I told myself to forget it. Then one cloudy Thursday, I opened my inbox and just stared. "Congratulations. You've placed second in the Coastal Rising Arts exhibition." There was a stipend. Small, but real. Enough. I stood there in the doorway of the studio, light spilling over the floor, and let myself feel it. Not pride, exactly. Something deeper. A kind of homecoming. I took the prize money and did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a lawyer, not to destroy Adrian, but to unbind myself completely. Dignity doesn't wear armor, it signs paperwork. We combed through the pieces like archaeologists. Receipts, texts, photos, the bracelet, the messages. I finally accessed our financials. My name, once on joint accounts, had been removed quietly, legally, strategically. There were investments I didn't know about. Cards opened without my consent. Donations to organizations I'd never heard of. The lawyer asked if I wanted to go public, expose him. But that wasn't what I needed. I didn't want to ruin him. I wanted to forget the sound of his voice in my head. I reclaimed my name. Dropped his from everything. The bank, my license, my social security. I opened my own business account under LMA Studio, named in part after the woman who helped resurrect me. I updated my will, updated my emergency contact. Started, for the first time in years, to live like I belonged entirely to myself. Adrian didn't know. I never called. Never texted, but sometimes late at night I'd open his social media, just to see. There he was, at dinner parties, on yachts next to Chloe, still airbrushed, still posing. Their smiles always looked like masks to me now. I noticed the ring. On her finger. An engagement. It didn't sting. It barely registered. Until I saw something strange. He was hosting a business gala. One of those lavish, champagne-drenched events he used to love. The kind where he'd parade me around like a prize. The date caught my eye. It was the same night the divorce papers were due to be served. I smiled. Not out of spite, out of symmetry. A fitting curtain call to the performance he'd been starring in for years. He'd be wearing his best suit. Holding court. Glass in hand, and somewhere between the amuse-bouche and the toasts, a server would approach with a crisp envelope and a polite smile. Ella Harper versus Adrian Blake. I imagined his face, the flicker, the scramble to control the narrative. But I wouldn't. Be there to see it. I'd be in the cottage, barefoot on the porch, wine in hand, music playing low. Maybe painting the sky if the colors were right, because I'd already had my revenge. It came in the form of peace. One night, as spring crawled into the air, I lit a fire in the old stone hearth and pulled out the photograph again. The one of me in the rain. I'd always thought she was the strongest version of me. But looking at her now, I realized she was only the beginning. I was not who I was before him. I was who I had become in spite of him. Scarred, yes, but reshaped. Whole in a way I'd never been, even before Adrian. I reached for my sketchbook, opened to the page where my ring had once sat pressed between its paper bones, and beneath it I wrote, "I am not the ruins, I am the rebuild." The invitation was never meant for me, but I went anyway. I didn't need to be on the guest list. I just needed to walk through the door. The red dress had been sitting in the back of my closet for years, buried behind Adrian's tastefully curated neutrals. He once said it was too loud, too clingy, too much. But that night I wanted to be too much. It was silk, the color of garnets and fresh blood, with thin straps and a slit that kissed the edge of bold. I pinned my hair up, left my collarbones bare. I wore no perfume, only the trace of sea salt that never quite left me now. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't flinch. I didn't need courage. I was made of it. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers and ambition. The kind of place where people didn't eat the food, they posed with it. I stepped through the glass doors, heels tapping like a metronome on the marble floor. Conversations paused. Heads turned. There were no gasps, just the widening of eyes. The polite surprise that comes when someone you wrote off returns brighter. Adrian was by the bar, laughing too loudly. His arm was around Chloe. She was wearing the kind of dress that didn't wrinkle and the kind of smile that hadn't cracked yet. He turned and froze. His smile twitched. "Ella?" I didn't answer right away. I walked toward him, the envelope in my hand. I could feel every second stretching like silk before a tear. I leaned in, handed it to him with a soft smile. "Happy 6-year anniversary." I kissed his cheek. It was dry, cold. He opened the envelope, blinked. "You're serving me here?" I tilted my head. "You love a performance." He laughed, trying to recover. "Jesus, Ella, is this really necessary? You couldn't have just sent an email?" Chloe looked between us, confused. "Let me talk to you outside," he muttered, reaching for my arm. I stepped back. "No." He stared. "You're really doing this here? Right now?" "Yes." And then, quietly, so only the nearby guests could hear, I said, 3 weeks before our anniversary, you bought a bracelet. Not for me." His jaw tightened. "I found the texts, Adrian. The photos, the weekend plans, the private jokes." "Ella, lower your voice." "I'm not shouting," I said calmly. "You just don't like being heard." His face flushed, eyes darting. People pretending not to listen. "You lied to me, removed me from accounts, treated my silence like consent. And all the while, I shrank so you could feel taller." "Ella." I held up a hand, not with fury, with finality. "I used to think I lost myself," I said. "But I was just misplaced, under your ego." I turned to Chloe, who now looked small beside him. "Careful, dear. He doesn't like red." And then I walked away. No applause, no collapse, just silence, and the clean echo of my heels fading into the hallway. Outside, the air was cool. Night had crept in soft and full. There was a marble fountain at the entrance, still trickling under the pale lights. I took the wedding ring from my finger, heavy not with diamonds but with years I couldn't get back. I didn't hesitate. The splash was small, almost gentle, but I felt it through my bones. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The next morning, I woke up in the cottage by the sea. The light was gold, and the ocean sighed like it had been holding its breath for me. I made tea, fed the cat that had started visiting. May came by around 10, her arms full of oranges and gossip. She spotted the new painting, framed now, drying in the corner. It was called Woman Becoming Fire. "You did it," she whispered. "I did." We sipped in silence. For a while, the good kind. the kind that holds, not hollows. I didn't check my phone. I didn't scroll his life anymore. I had no interest in what Adrian would spin. Let him tell his version. I had lived the truth. In the studio, my sketchbook sat open on the desk, the same page where I once pressed my ring now bore a new sketch, embers lifting from a woman's back like wings. Underneath, in my handwriting, I did not burn. I became. And that, I suppose, was the end, or maybe the beginning. End of story.